Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. Now, there was in the days of Herod, king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, after the order of Abiah, whose wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Now, they were both righteous, walking in the commandments and statutes before God, blameless. But they had no children, as that Elizabeth was barren, and they were both now very well strict age. It came to pass, as he executed the priest's office before God, after the order of his course, the custom of the priest being that whenever he went in temple before God was to burn incense unto the Lord. So here we have an introduction of Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth. Now it's not mentioned the significance so far of their introduction, but just a background is given of them. We know that he's a priest after the order of Abiah, and she's of the daughters of Aaron. So it would seem that these are two Levites getting together. What it doesn't get. So this is the beginning of the book of Luke. We just saw the introduction where he spoke, as many have taken in hand to set forth in order of declaration of those things which are more surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. It seemed good unto me also, having had perfect understanding of all things which were at the very first, to write unto thee in order, O most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of the things wherein thou hast been instructed. So then we cut right here. So this is at the very beginning, book of Luke. So now, the significance of this is that they are John the Baptist's parents. So he's given a real nice introduction here. We already went through Matthew and Mark. He was mentioned, and really him baptizing Jesus, after having preached in the wilderness, preparing the way before him, is how he was, broadcasted in these first two books. So now here we get a little more in depth. I always like to say that the gospels, they don't perfectly repeat each other. It's not the same words and things that are emphasized, but that each gospel emphasizes a different part of the story. And wherever more information is given, more detail, is safe to go with that one, because that means that that is the authority, on that specific issue. So now here we're getting into John the Baptist. So his parents are mentioned, and you get the sense that they are both of upright background. And we know it's going to be the same for Mary and Joseph, parents of Jesus. So you get a sense from this introduction that they're quiet people. They have found God and they serve him in truth. Not like the scribes and Pharisees, because we know that they're chief priests, elders, and scribes. And he's not mentioned as a chief priest or scribe. So one can take away the observation that him being not as high ranking as they are, but maintaining his integrity. One would hope that, it will be both of them, first of all, that would be, in integrity of heart, before God. And at least certainly the one that has the more authority. Because, that's how we got to where we got to. We just got done with book of Mark. We saw Jesus be crucified. It was these, high priests, chief priests, elders, that they sought false witnesses from the beginning, and they brought them forth, they lined them up and had them all accuse Jesus, falsely of all these things that they did. So, and them having intimate knowledge of the whole structure that they were putting together, how much integrity they lack. So we hear that both of them, they walk uprightly before God, Zacharias and Elizabeth. It just goes to show you never know, and you never know in what corner God has his people, and where you think he might have them, he might just not, and the place that you're not looking for them, they might just be. So you can't overlook anybody, you can't count anybody out, and don't be so hasty to count anybody in. But as the Bible says, test the spirits, whether they be of God. Test the fruits. People do lie. They do make themselves out to be, things that they're not. I think as little children, a lot of people learn to deceive. It's just naughtiness that never got corrected. In all these videos that they have on social media, they'll see where they test a child. They'll tell them not to, touch the cookie jar, but wait until I come back. And then, the camera is on them, and then it shows them. And even when, they weren't told, right then and there, but it was just given as a general rule where they have like surveillance, certain, items, and they watch the kids, touch what they're not supposed to. So here we see, the course of Abia being, mentioned. And I'll get later into that. This was basically established by David, and it's basically a rotation of the priests. There's 24 courses, and Abia was the 8th. So they had their set time throughout the year, when they were supposed to minister. I did do a little reading into it. Not much information was given, but just enough for you to understand, why it's mentioned, where it came from, the purpose that it serves really, and how it operates. So in this introductory passage for his parents, John the Baptist, we really see them devoted, sticking to the temple, him keeping his office short, burning incense before the Lord, walking in the commandments, and the statutes and ordinances, blameless, and that it said that they were righteous before God. Now we know that no man is perfect. Even Abraham, Bible says that Abraham believed God and it was, counted unto him for righteousness. One of my favorite verses is, you see it in the Old Testament when the children of Israel were just coming out of Egypt and they were walking through the land. I believe it was when, the king Balak, he hired the prophet Balaam to curse them, to put a voodoo curse on them. And as God was speaking unto this prophet, he was mentioning that Israel, I have seen no fault in them, that my people are perfect. Now we know that no one is perfect, but we'll see God, attribute righteousness unto people, even holiness. And, the image that this gives me in my mind is how God, he holds us in the palm of his hands. When he has those palms closed, the only thing exposed is his hands, right? So, he puts the difference. He is the difference. We know that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. But as he shelters us, we wear his outer shell, everything that he is. We get a mention in here of Herod the king. Now we know that when Jesus was, doing his ministry, it was King Herod that was also, in rule. So now I would have to ask the question: is, the title, is it a title as Caesar is? I would make a guess. I say that Herod was a title, not so much the name, as Caesar was. This is the same Herod that we would see later, persecute Jesus, even at his birth with the three wise men. When they saw the star and they came searching for him, they ran into Herod first and they told him of their mission. Now him with deceit, because they mentioned him to be, Christ the King, and he was immediately threatened by that and sought to destroy him. So when they left, he was like, bring me word that I may also come and worship him. When what he wanted to do was, come and destroy him, to take his life, even at such a young age. Now, them being warned by God in a dream, they did, went the other way when they were leaving. We saw him get upset and destroy all children under 2 years old. But that, Joseph and Mary were told to go into Egypt, so they escaped. When he died, they came out and it was heard that his son was reigning in his stead. So they went into Nazareth. That's why he was called a Nazarene. So we know that, based on, God's selection for Jesus and John the Baptist, that he entrusts, his most, precious, assignments, unto clean people, to holy people. We know that Rahab the harlot that hid the spies when they came to search out the land, and the king, sought them that he might destroy them, because Israel, they were taking over the whole place, removing all the nations that were before. And they were next, and that's why they were there. So the king, he was trying to react as the other nations did not, but she hid them, on the rooftop among some stuff that was up there. So when they came, she told them that they left and she didn't know where they went. And they pursued them for 3 days, I believe it was. And when they couldn't find them, then after, she let them go when it was safe for them to leave so that they would not be discovered. So Rahab, the harlot, the prostitute, she was like, I believe, the great grandmother of David, either the great or the great great. So even though a harlot was allowed to the lineage of Jesus, when it came time to bring him in, a virgin was chosen, Mary. Now while, Elizabeth, she was not a virgin, she was barren. So, that they had tried for many years. But, from their introduction, that she had only been with her husband, Zacharias, this priest, John the Baptist, so they were related, the Marys. I forget what was the relation. It was either like cousins or something like that. So now, Mary, she was chosen, divinely by God. Was it necessary for John the Baptist to be related to Jesus? Was there anything in scripture that say that he was supposed to be? I don't believe that there was. I've never read. After this, I'll be sure to research. But while Mary was chosen, the seed of the Christ handed to her, Elizabeth, as we'll see later, she requested a child, promising that she would give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. Just like Samuel's mother from the Old Testament, who was the priest during, Saul and David's reign. Actually, Samuel died during Saul's reign. That's why he had to call for him, through, the witch of Endor, a sorceress, a voodoo woman, pretty much. And when when Saul did, that's when he died the next day, because he had consulted this witch. And then David, he took his reign. So Samuel actually died, before David got there. But it was Samuel that anointed David to be king when Saul had disobeyed. So we see Samuel, his mother was barren, the father having, two wives. I believe it was, Elkanah was the other wife, and Hannah was Samuel's, mother, being the second wife. Now she was barren. The other one, she had born, children. So we see some really important prophets, come from, barren women. We know that Abraham, who was given the promise, his wife Sarah was barren. She gave her handmaid Hagar, which bore him Ishmael, which we know to be the father of the Muslims. And then God, finally gave, Sarah a child in her old age. Abraham was 100 years old when he got him. Alright, so now here we see the stage being set for the entry of John the Baptist. We know that he is the voice crying in the wilderness, crying, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make ye all his paths straight." Jesus bragged about him, saying that among those born of women, there is no greater than John the Baptist. Nevertheless, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Jesus revealed unto them that this was Elias which was to come in two separate scriptures. Two separate times he revealed unto the disciples that John the Baptist is indeed the Elias. We know that Elijah was referred to as Elias of the Old Testament, and I think that that's something that people, they don't come to the realization. When they hear Elias, they automatically go to Elijah, but it's to understand that Elijah was the Elias of the Old Testament, but John the Baptist is the Elias of the New. All right, so now we can get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, "The days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abia, whose wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth." All right, so here we have, the once upon a time for this story. Like I said, we just got the introduction that I quoted earlier, and then we jump right into this. In the days of Herod, king of Judea. So now, Israel was split into two kings in Jerusalem and Judah. Jerusalem really was all the other tribes. God left, Judah, strictly for David's sake. When Solomon had sinned, ironically, the wisest king, he went and burned incense, because he had many strange wives from many, strange nations. And they all, caused him to serve their gods. So God, he gave, the kingdom to, I believe it was Jehoshaphat, while leaving, Judah. He left two tribes, unto the house of David. And then the irony is that, Jehoshaphat, as soon as he got, this kingdom, he made two golden calves and caused all of Israel to go after them. So, God, he meant well. And it seems as if it would have been just better leaving it in the hands of Solomon, because at least it was only Solomon that was doing this. But then when he made these two golden calves, the whole, all of Israel was sacrificing unto it, and he put them, spread out throughout so that everybody would have close access to it, no matter where they were. So the history of the calf, when they came out of Egypt, and God called Moses up into, I believe it was Moses, Mount Sinai. He gave him the 10 Commandments. The Lord said, get thee down, because the people that thou hast brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They made the golden calf. When they saw that Moses returned not, because he was up there 40 days, they came to Aaron and told him to make them gods. And he took all the jewelry out, because when they left, they spoiled, the Egyptians. And God gave them, all sorts of gold and, jewelry and these things. And he melted everything and he made this golden calf. So Herod of, Judea. So Herod, he's been, introduced to give reference to the timeline that it was during his reign that all this is about to take place. So in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a certain priest named Zechariah after the order of Abiah. So Zechariah was his name. And we'll see later where it was, common for especially the firstborn son to be named after his father. And the angel had told him to name him John. And he couldn't speak because he didn't believe the angel when he told him. So he said that thou shalt not be able to speak until the child is born. So when they wanted to name him, Zechariah after the father, he had to write it down. He said, no, his name is John. And that's when his tongue was loose and he spake. So like I said, the course of Abiah. So now King David was the one that did this. And it was so that there would always be a priest to minister in the temple. So now there were 24. And Abiah was after Abijah the priest. We know that there was a king Abijah and then there was a priest Abijah. It's two separate guys. So Abijah was the eighth, in rotation, 8 out of 24. And their service was for 1 week. So now I looked up the Jewish, weeks of the year, and they said it ranged from, 50 weeks to 5 weeks, depending on if it was a leap year, which would be 255 days to 285 days. So they have a leap month, where we have a leap year. So our leap year would be 366, right? And we have it more often. But their, leap year would be less often, because there's a difference of 30 days, 255 days versus 285 days. So many more years would have to go by before they could use that extra 30 days, right? So they were to serve for 1 week, which means that they would be serving twice a year, except during special feasts where, all, the courses would be there. All of them would be there. You could look at maybe like the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Passover, Feast of Weeks. And they have many feasts. I can't name, I'm not an expert in these feasts, but just know that they have a lot. We don't really see kings being mentioned, after they went into Babylon. I think that was the end of the kings. If you notice, after, King David, Solomon, like I said, he burned incense unto false gods. Jehoshaphat, so did he. And then, we would have like really, I would say, a random luck or the draw. Because one king, he would show up and he would do such, the same thing, burning and sacrificing to these idols. And then, you'd see like a one random king show up and have a heart follow after God to destroy these idols, to burn, to, remove the groves that they were, conducting these activities. But, after enough of this, he sent them into captivity into Babylon. That's where we saw Daniel, being put in the lion's den. So we saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to bow when the king played the music. They were cast into the fire furnace. He said, I put three men in there, but I see four. The fourth is like unto the Son of God. So whose wife was of the daughters of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. We know that, Aaron, he was the first high priest. What would, one call Moses? So Moses was the brother to Aaron. When it came time for, God to send Moses to bring the children of Israel out, he said, I don't speak well, pretty much. I forget the specific, vernacular that he used to describe it, but pretty much I don't speak well and I'm a stutterer. So that he said, thy brother, Aaron shall go with thee. That, that he shall be unto you a mouth instead of a mouth, then you shall be unto him instead of God. So he actually used, Aaron as his spokesperson. Now, if you know the story of Moses, so we know that there was a famine in the land with Israel, Jacob and his 12 sons. Joseph being sold into slavery, who had become, the governor of Egypt. And, God had warned Pharaoh with the two dreams that there was a famine coming. And Joseph interpreted the dream, and by his wisdom, because of his wisdom, he was set over the land. So the brothers went down. They didn't know it was him. Eventually, he revealed himself unto them, and then he brought his whole family down because that was the only place they had any food. So anybody in any vicinity country, they had to come there to get. So then when Joseph died, and there arose another pharaoh that knew not what Joseph had done for the Egyptian, because the first year they spent all their money buying food. The second year they had to sell their cattle, and then after that they sold their lands. So there was a law that Pharaoh got 20%. So Joseph actually got Pharaoh 20% from all of his own people because of what he had set up. But then a new Pharaoh came up, which should have been there seeing everything that happened, but it doesn't give the timeline if he was the next Pharaoh or if he came several pharaohs after. Because I would imagine if he was a young boy, he would have seen Joseph in action. He would have known what he did for the people. But then this Pharaoh, he hated them, and he was worried that they would overpower them or even join forces with their enemies and destroy the Egyptians. So they put them to hard labor and made them slaves. He gave a law that drown all the male children. But the midwives, they feared God and they didn't. So God, the Bible says that God dealt kindly unto these midwives. He blessed them. But at the birth of Moses, his mom, well, she couldn't hide him anymore. She put him in the river. And lo and behold, Pharaoh's daughter came out to wash herself, and she saw a basket, floating. She sent her maid to pick it up. They called for somebody to nurse the child, to breastfeed it. And the very own mother was called, which, that shows you how God works. And then, Pharaoh's daughter took him to her own, and he became her son. And then the Bible says that, Moses, he knew that it was by his hands that God would give, relief unto the Israelites. One day he saw an Egyptian, smiting Israelite, and he slew him, when nobody was around, and hit him in the sand. And, not shortly after that, he came in between two Israelites arguing with each other. And when he would have, parted them, he said, you be brethren, why argue one with another? And they said, who make thou a ruler over us? Will you kill us as you did the Egyptian? So when Pharaoh knew what he had did, he had to go on the run. Midian, and that's where he met his wife. So then Moses, he was sent back to Egypt to deliver the children of Israel, coming from Midian. So Aaron was the brother of Moses. Like I said, because Moses, he was a stutterer, he stuttered, and God sent, Aaron, which when they, got out of Egypt and they were given all the statutes, the 10 Commandments and everything, Aaron, he became the first high priest. So when they say the daughter, she was a daughter of Aaron, so far back, this goes, and that's what it means. So she came from his tribe. And, Aaron, he was the Levites, as was Moses, which were the priests. So the next one says that they were righteous before God, walking in all the statutes and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. So they were righteous. Understand that their works were righteous, which, it reflects a state of the heart, the kind of thoughts that run through your mind in this common, day, in this present day, I should say, rather. We do a lot of self-development, self-reflection, and we attempt to change our inner thoughts. We attempt to change the things that we focus on daily. And, with success, you'll find yourself thinking differently, the kind of thoughts that go through your mind. When God destroyed the earth by flood, it was said that he looked upon the imagination of men and saw that it was evil continually. So if they weren't thinking about, some sexual immorality, lying with other people's wives, just being sexually immoral, same sex, killing, stealing, it was just lawlessness. Their heart, it was just barbaric. Their heart was barbaric. There was no depth. There was no integrity or morals or character. There was no. If you look at when God gave Moses all these statutes, a lot of these things were to address what was going on even in those days. What was going on currently, even in those days, it was. If you look at all the statutes given unto Moses, you will see that they are deal with something that was going on. Thou shalt not lie with thy brother's wife, thy father's wife. Thou shalt not lie with thy sister. Thou shalt not steal thy, neighbor's flock, his manservant, his wife. If you look at, all these statutes, you will see that these things were going on. And this was God's answer to all of these things. So they were righteous before God, meaning that if you were to interrupt their thinking and to listen to their heart, the things that you would hear would be different for most people. Often the righteous, their reflections is oftentimes being in. It's like they're grieved, with what they see going on and what they hear going on. I forget, who was the priest and who was what was going on. I believe it was in the days of Judges where things were going on that really didn't need it to be going on, and God, He sent an angel telling him to mark, every man that weepeth and is grieved, that weepeth for the city, because there was such immorality going on. And these were the people that were spared. So the righteous, usually he's find them being grieved a lot with the things that's going on and speaking out against it. They don't speak outwardly, they speak inwardly. When it says that they were righteous before God, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. And these people, they find the beauty in life. They're uplifters, they're pure, if you put things in their hands, they're gonna mold it into something positive and good, and it's gonna be upright. And it says, walking in the ordinances and commandments of the Lord, blameless. And what are the ordinances and commandments? Well, Jesus, He came to give us the New Testament, so they were still in the Old Testament. So these are, the book of Kings, Proverbs, Psalms, prophets, Judges, the books of Moses. All the statutes, the Levitical laws, all these things. So they observed them, they knew them, kept them. They were not like the scribes and Pharisees who could recite and even teach the whole thing, but then they weren't living any of it. So they were blameless. They weren't perfect. Anything that they would ever do wrong, they would be so quick to acknowledge it. And they did not take pride in walking in error or sin or walking in things that they were not supposed to. So being blameless means that they're not perfect, but nobody can come and point the finger on them. Because if you do, even if what you're saying about them is true, know that they live, before God with a certain heart. And this heart, it gives them that instant forgiveness. Their course is different. And, the person that would show up to accuse this person, you would look and see, the difference in the accuser. It's ironic that the accuser would be the one that's, not walking upright, that's not walking blameless, but they have so much to say. So blameless, if you were to bring, accusation before them on God, it would just fall on deaf ears, because, their heart posture, who they were, the direction they were going, the energy that they were giving off was different. So the next one says, but they were childless, as Elizabeth was barren, and they were now both well stricken in age. So after all the years of trying, they had no children. Unlike birth of Samuel, where, the father, he had two wives. So when the other conceived, we know that it was on, the mother's fault and not the father. Like I said, there was two wives. There was Elkanah and Hannah. Hannah was Samuel's mother, and she was barren. Elkanah did bear children. But now John the Baptist, his parents, it was just one husband, one wife. I'm calling on a story where she asked for a child. She went up into the temple praying, and the husband thought that she was drunk. And then that's when she made the petition that, if he were to give her a man child, that she would, give him unto the Lord all the days of his life. So with John the Baptist's parents, there was no second, wife, for us to know who was at fault for not being able to give children, because men can also have problems. It's not only on the women. So now they were well stricken in age, so that she had stopped. The Bible refers to it as having custom after women, which is her menses, menstrual cycle, having passed menopause. So they were childless, and it says that Hannah was barren. In those days, it was never ever referred to as the man. If he couldn't have children, then the wife was barren. It didn't even stop to consider. But then again, most men, they would have multiple wives. So if another wife was able to conceive, but they would say that it's the wife that was barren. But there were men that only had one wife. Beauty of Bathsheba, when David saw her, Uriah had one wife, but they had no children. And her being that beautiful, I don't think that. And if she was able to conceive with David, then was Uriah, then you would stand to reason that Uriah would have been the problem, right? So then the next one says, came to pass after he was executing the priest's office before God in the order of his course. So this is his week during the year, or one of his weeks. Like I said, they get 2 weeks, not back to back, but it's a week, and they run through the whole 24 and they start over. So this was during his week. So we're getting ready to see something happen. And we won't see what it is until the next video, which is tomorrow. So we're in his week. So the next one says, the custom of the priest's office was for him to burn incense before the Lord when he went into the temple of the Lord. So him executing the priest's office, burning incense. I was not able to find if all 24 they had all the same duties. And it was just, the time that we gave each one a fair chance, and so that nobody would get burnt out. I was unable to find if they do the same exact duties, or does one, specialize. Like maybe if he was burning incense, was the next one, I don't know, like maybe have something to do with the showbread. Maybe a next one would be, more of a candle guy, or whatever. I'm not an expert on the different things that they did in the temple, but if his lot was to burn incense, was that all of their lots, or did each one have a more specific, so that only it would not just be one thing being done throughout the whole year, but each one came and they brought a specific, they had a specific function, a specific expertise, so to speak. I'm Straw Greenhorn.